All right,
you guys.
I've just started the recording for everyone. So welcome, good afternoon or evening. I guess not really. Yeah, there's got to be some evening people. We want to welcome Erica and Ken from Walter Scott Winery,
for having us.
who's become, I know many have been fans of their wines for a long time, but it's been sort of a recent sensation on Wine Berserkers, and driven largely by our co-host, Charlie, who I'm going to introduce in a second. And I want to just quickly go over some guidelines. Everyone's muted, as you notice, but the chat function is something you need to use while we're having this presentation, because discussion occurs throughout the process. And it's nice, people talk about what wines they're drinking, or maybe sometimes they put questions in if they're not planning to ask them later on. One other point is you have two views, gallery view and speaker view. This is recorded in speaker view, so only the main person speaking shows. Gallery view shows you a grid of up to 49 on a screen at once, just so you can see everybody. If you choose to do gallery view, that might be nice, because then you can watch this afterward in speaker view and see what the close-ups are like. So since we're not doing any close-up work on barrels or barrel samples or getting on vineyards or anything like that, gallery view could work. Then I assume Charlie may want to do some questions and answers at the end, so I'll let him give the instructions for that. Go ahead, Charlie.
All right. So like Todd mentioned, we're going to do first a series of questions with Eric and Ken, just kind of more broad questions that I think a lot of people would want answered, so we don't have people wanting to ask the same questions over and over again. And then we'll leave the next half of the Zoom for you to present questions that you want to ask. Like Todd said, we'll unmute you. You just do your little participant, raise your hand, and then we'll see when you raise your hand, and then we'll call you in order you raised your hand. And then you'll jump on the video and you can ask your own question. We'll unmute you, and then when you're done, we'll mute you, and Erica and Ken can answer the question. But otherwise, we're good to go. We're here welcoming Eric and Ken from Walter Scott in Oregon. As you know, they make fantastic Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, some Gamay last year and this year. We're happy to have them here, spending their Saturday afternoon with us. But if they want to just kind of say hello really quick, then we can jump right into the questions.
Hi guys, thanks for spending your Saturday night with us. Hot date.
Cocktail hour, happy hour.
Okay, so we'll start off with a kind of a general broad question. Where did Walter Scott kind of start, like from the get-go?
So I'll take that one. So Ken and I both spent our young adult lives and careers in the world of wine in different capacities. Ken was working for St. Vincent for 14 years and simultaneously also working for an importer by the name of Vondegaard in Portland, selling wine, learning about wine. Like he caught the wine bug in college and just dove in 100% head first, started reading, tasting, drinking, approached and literally harassed winemakers in the Yosemite Hills over and over until Mark Lostick hired him. And because he's very tenacious, and you'll hear about that throughout this, I'm sure. And I was in restaurants and stayed in restaurants, went through my sommelier training, both through the court and through the International Sommelier Guild, and was a wine director in Portland. So he was helping teach me about wine, shared a lot about Burgundy, about Oregon winemaking. I thought he was very, very cute and quite nice. And so I bought a lot of wine from him.
It's a good account.
Yeah, over time we became very good friends, and then got together in 2007. And when we did that, Ken it was his 14th harvest at St. Innocent. And I sort of said, what's your plan? And he had
I'd made a little bit of wine in 2006 and had been thinking about it since 2002.
I just want to butt in here. He actually made Roussan from Washington, and his idea was that he wanted to make Roussan and Grenache. And I said, why?
I was like, everyone's doing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Why do you want to do that? And he's like, everyone else is doing that. But there's not really room for more voices in that realm and in the Willamette Valley. And I said, well, I really think you need to consider that. And maybe you need to think about, I said, you've taught me more about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and I jokingly call him the Rain Man of Burgundy in basketball because he can rattle off stats about domains back 3 generations and basketball players back to their college and sometimes high school days. And so he came back to me and said, you know, I think you're right.
Again, baby, you're right.
No, but he was like, I think you're right. Okay, let's do it. And so we emptied every dime we had and we started Walter Scott, which coming from the world of restaurants and wineries was about $20,000. And we got a label designer, got some barrels, some fermenters, and our friends at Patricia Green Cellars, Jim and Patty, who Ken was very, very good friends with.
I've known Jim going back to 95. I think he started in 93. So we've both been in the business about the same amount of time. And he and I were very close, and he knew that Eric and I wanted to do this thing, as crazy as it was. And they were generous enough to offer us a small spot in their winery, and then I got to work for them and learn a different perspective in winemaking, and also work with an amazing crew and continue the process of learning and evolving.
Right. And the following year, Ken was hired by Evening Land. So when in 2007, when Evening Land took over Seven Springs, that was, you know, a big part of the transition for St. Innocent. They lost almost 40% of their fruit came from Seven Springs. And so there was some big sadness in the valley when Evening Land took over that vineyard.
Yeah.
And Ken certainly was in that camp. And then one day,
probably one of the most outspoken guys against Evening Land stealing this vineyard from us until they offered me a job.
No, well, so one day they came into the restaurant that I was working at, and they shared all of the Evening Land wines. It was the 2007 inaugural vintage. And I tasted them, and I was really quiet. And at the end of the tasting, Mark Tarlov, who was one of the founding partners, was like, so what do you think? And I was like, these are nice wines. And I said, do you know who my partner is, right? And he's like, no. And I said, Ken Pahlow. And he goes, oh, so you hate me. And I said, no, I don't hate you. I said, but can I keep all of these samples? It was the end of the day. And he said, yeah, you're my last appointment. And so he left, and I called Ken and I said, you need to come down to the restaurant and taste some wines. And so he came down and he tasted them all, and we both looked at each other and were like, holy shit.
Yeah.
These are amazing. And then about 6 months later, Mark approached Ken and hired him, and part of his compensation was that we could make the wines in the corner there too. So that was pretty special.
Again, another opportunity to learn.
Huge.
Isabel Meunier, Ian Birch, Ryan Hannaford, the vineyard manager.
Dominique
Lafon, obviously.
Who is one of the most incredibly sweet, generous humans on the planet, was so open with his knowledge and his experience. So
and a guy who's not satisfied. I mean, he's been running Comte Lafon since what, 83? I tell this story all the time. At a lunch during harvest of 2010, 2011, one of the interns goes, "Hey Dominique, what's the best wine you've ever drank?" He's like, "I haven't drank it yet."
Oh yeah. Sorry.
And then they're like, "Okay, well, what's the best wine you've ever made?" And he's like, "I haven't made it yet." And for me, that was just a sign of someone who is driven and passionate and committed to never settling and advancing his craft and continuing to learn from others, and also sharing his knowledge. And that continues to inspire us to this day.
Super inspiring. So anyway, in 2012, Evening Land went through a big change. And we leased the facility that we're in now. So we actually sit on the Bethel Heights winery estate property on the Justice Vineyard. And the winery is about a 3,500 case winery that we make around 5,500 cases in. So it's literally packed to the ceiling with barrels, and it's like Tetris every day, trying to do anything, but it's an amazing spot. And we live on the property, and it's super special. And we get to live and work and buy fruit from the Castile family, who to us are.
And we're in the Yola Amity Hills, which is the area that we truly, truly believe in as an AVA, in its uniqueness and stylistic qualities and terroir. Yeah. One thing we forgot to mention, which we always do in even tastings here, Walter was my grandfather, Scott, my nephew. And it was something I thought about since '02. And for us, it was not just a tribute to them, but a tribute to family and all those that we are. So that's been interesting.
Hold on. Go ahead. Mark unmuted himself and took over the screen there for a second.
Oh, Mark.
Oh, Mark.
Don't you dare.
I hope we answered that question, Charlie.
Yeah, absolutely. Great detail. So kind of as we talked about, as you've grown, location, size. So what's the general production size of each vintage now? And what's the allocation between like Pinot and Chardonnay?
Sure. So '09, we made 600 cases and continued to increase. So while at Eveningland, I think we doubled.
We grew about 50% every year until, and our goal originally was, let's be a 4,000 case winery.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at some of the people that we aspire to or are we look up to, you've got Evesham Wood and Cameron and Brookhouse and these incredible small domains that are family owned and run and operated. And they were all right around, 35 to 4,000 cases. I'm like, okay, well, that's really where we can.
It's a sweet spot where we can maintain a super high standard of quality and make the wines, because we make the wines. Right. 2012, she and I processed effectively 35 tons, the two of us plus our partners Sue and Andy helping where they could, and we had a week to do it.
So and then to this point, like when Andy and Sue came in as partners, we'd moved into this facility. We jumped off a cliff without a parachute, essentially. And we're like, we can sell every bottle of wine we have in bottle, and we can pay for all the equipment we need. And about 2 months before harvest, I looked at Ken and I'm like, I think we're in trouble. I think we actually need maybe an investor or there's a better plan.
And it was something we were definitely against, because we're like, fuck this. We're going to do this on our own, and we're going to make it happen.
This is our baby. We've built this baby. And so we ended up going to Sue and Andy because we knew them through the restaurant and wine world, and they're incredible people and friends. And so we said, hey, can you tell us how do you structure a partnership? Like, how does that work to protect us, to protect the partners? And they said, okay, that's great. Let's have a meeting. Sue and I had lunch. I had a bottle of champagne. And at the end of lunch with a buzz on, she was like, why don't you guys just ask us to be partners? And I was like, what? Watch out what you ask for. And then we both went our separate ways. And she went home and said to Andy, we're doing this. And I went home and said, oh my God, was she serious, or was it the champagne?
So we went back and forth over the course of a month, but
they were like, what? Where's your cash flow analysis? What's your business plan?
What is that?
We sell wine, we make wine. We sell wine, we make wine. And so Andy came in.
And we were pretty good at selling wine and making wine.
And he shows us all of this, and he said, okay, listen, I know 4,000 is where you guys kind of have always aimed, but let's look at the cash flow and let's analyze this, and what do you think we can do and really do well? And so through his sort of mentoring and our figuring out the space better, we decided that 5,500 cases.
At that point, we were about 1,800 cases, and Sue and Andy, as their partnership, bought in 20% of what the value was, and they remain 20% partners to this day and are family.
Amazing.
By the way, I just unmuted Andy too, so if he wants to comment, he can as well.
Andy,
yeah, I'm sure Andy will definitely be able to pipe in on some business stuff and questions.
Oh, shucks, guys.
Story about our drunken lunch, baby.
But yeah, these two are something else, and
they are family.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
We're blushing, but it wouldn't matter if it weren't for you guys having the vision, talent, and drive to take this where it's been. Oh.
Well,
thanks, buddy.
Having you guys, so they were our parachute in 2012.
Yeah,
they actually came and sorted fruit and cleaned equipment and everything with us, and it was amazing.
Yeah, we won the partnership lottery for sure.
But to finish Charlie's question,
yes,
we originally were, I would say, maybe 85% Pinot Noir, and Ken and I had always wanted to get Chardonnay, but it was really hard to source good Chardonnay fruit and that was farmed well, and there just wasn't very much here. And so it took us until 2011 to finally get Chardonnay.
Yeah.
And since 2011, we made how many cases of Chardonnay in 2011?
140.
Yeah, to now today, Chardonnay is about 65% of what we do.
Yeah.
So it's a huge commitment.
The Chardonnay barrel room, which you guys can't see, has about 3,400 cases worth of Chardonnay in it. And we've had vineyards plant acreage on our behalf for us, and then sourced out other sites, and through relationships and introductions, you know, we were introduced to Craig, who is on here as well, in 2013. So we get to work with him. Seven Springs, I harassed them relentlessly for 3 years to try and get some Chardonnay there. Freedom Hill planted 2 acres just for us as a partnership there. So it's just been, I would say, a slow evolution, but it's been pretty dramatic and quick. I mean, to go from 140 cases in 2011 to 3,400 cases by 2019 is a pretty steep curve.
Yeah.
How much Roussanne and Grenache are you doing now?
Zero.
Thank God. Thank God.
No, I mean,
can you think about if we'd gone in that direction, where our world was today?
You know, we believe in this valley. We're, you know, the pioneers set a standard, and every generation since then, and we're trying to take the foundation that's been set and add to it and contribute
Yeah.
and maybe change the direction of the conversation a little bit here and there, and just be part of it. I mean, add to the next generation, because there's going to be someone else who comes in who takes it to another level. I mean, there's always these generational shifts, and you know, we've got friends, and there are some younger, we're 40, I'm 50, 44, whatever. I mean, there's
feeling that young right now.
There's, you know, late 20s, early 30s that are doing Chardonnay only projects. There's a lot of exciting things happening in this valley, and you know, we respect what came here before us, and we want to contribute to it, but also put our stamp on it to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's exciting time. The farming and the winemaking is really at an all-time high right now, and everyone's sharing information and knowledge, and it's a really Willamette Valley, is really an open book. I mean, you have winemakers that come into each other's cellars, and you ask questions, pointed questions, and you get very clear, concise, real answers, and you learn from each other, and that's really amazing.
There's no secrets in winemaking. It's all about execution and details in the end.
Sorry, we're staying on the questions, right, with Charlie, not these.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. It'll tie into it. So
we're talking a lot. Sorry, we're nervous.
We kind of mentioned that Freedom Hills did 2 acres of vineyards for you guys. So are you personally working in the vineyards, you know, figuring out when you want to pick, have a lot of control over, or you're still letting the farmers using their knowledge to decide when?
All of it.
And so we don't own any land, so we don't farm anything, although we did lease a vineyard for 6 years and did a lot of the work ourselves: sprays, raising catch wires, shoot thinning, etc.
I learned quickly it wasn't my bag.
I love being in the vineyard. Erica's like, I'm out. I got other things to do. So we leased a little vineyard called Clos des Oiseaux for 3 years from a lovely family, and then it changed ownership, and we shifted out of that. But we have acreage contracts with everyone we work with. In that scenario, we have more control within those vineyards, especially with regards to yields. And we determine picking decision, but as with everything that we do, we are there to learn. I'm not going to go into Freedom Hill and tell Dan Duché, who's been farming since 1981, how to farm his vineyard, but because of our acreage deal and wanting to learn from each other, we have certain requests that we make in order to really show off what we want to do, but also showing off what we think is those best qualities of those sites, because showing off place is incredibly important to us.
I think one point to make right here too is that by being acreage contract, for us, it really is a partnership with the growers. You know, the growers that we work with, we have such a huge amount of respect for. I think that we're very lucky in the way that we're working with growers, many of whom have been in this valley or growing grapes or in the business for decades, and certainly know more than we do in a lot of sense. And many of them have been living on and intimately involved with their land for so much longer than, so coming in and just, starting to be like, this is what we want. That's not what it is. I mean, it's a partnership. We are making sure that they can farm their vineyards and have a steady income from us because it's acreage. We're going to take the highs and the lows. There's going to be years when there's, bigger
Years
crop
where-
and years when there's less. And
Years where Mother Nature is unkind, we're there to support them. Or a year if there's like, holy crap,
I
there's
know
like
COVID.
there's 5 tons to the acre out there. We want to thin back to 2.
They're not seeing money drop.
They're not
on the
seeing
ground.
money dropped on the ground because we're on an acreage contract.
But it's a partnership, and we consider them family. And I think that we're very lucky to be surrounded by people that we're learning from, and they're pushing us, and we're pushing them, and we all have the same goal in mind, which is to grow and produce the best fruit and the best wine that we possibly can, and show off and celebrate their vineyards. So,
and in showing up, I mean, we put the vineyard name on there, and we thank every grower on the side of the label. And if we're going to do that, what goes in the glass, it better be special. So it's very, very important to us. And right now it's taken us, and we've earned our way into better and better fruit sources since we started.
yeah.
But at this moment, if we worked with nothing but the vineyards we have now for the rest of the time we're in business, and we hope that's a very long time, we're set. Now that we've got this like core group of vineyards, we can now learn and push the envelope, whether it's yield, farming practices, tweaks in the winery. Now it's just little details moving forward. So
cool. I think someone in the chat kind of mentioned Burgundy, and I think you guys kind of touched on that a little bit too. So Ken, I think you've mentioned before that you've done harvest in Burgundy. Can you tell us a little bit about your time there and what application you've brought back into making wine in Oregon?
So up until 2017, Eric and I had worked a lot of jobs, and I had worked 2 jobs for years and had never had the opportunity to work a harvest in another region.
He represented, I will say this, he represented some of the great domains
of Burgundy.
Yeah, I mean, he was selling Meunier-Giborg for 10
years.
Whatever, however many years, for almost a decade. Yeah. And like,
so, the first wine book I bought was Hugh Johnson's World Atlas of Wine, and it happened to open up in Burgundy. I'm like, that sounds good. We'll just start right here, which is probably one of the most complex regions in the world, but it's where I started. And so I had never been able to work a harvest in another region. In 2011, while at Evening Land, I was supposed to go work harvest with Dominique Lafon, but things didn't work out. But my awesome wife was like, so Burgundy is almost always 2 weeks ahead of us in timing of harvest. And she's like, if they're ever ahead again, you need to go.
Yeah, you're going.
And in 2017, they were almost at one point 4 weeks ahead of us. So she said, you got to go. And I reached out to Dominique and said, hey, can I come work for you? And he's like, absolutely. You'll be on my hip, and where I need you, you can do stuff. And I ended up doing pretty much everything. I picked Genevière, I picked Montrachet, I pressed off his Merceau Narbeau, I worked a day at Lafarge, spent...
You got to barrel down with his...
I barreled down with his cellar guy, Porozo, Perrier, and Charme on the same day. And, it wasn't whole-scale things, but little details. Just the minute things in press cycles. We also went over to see Rouleau, and Jean-Marc was nice enough to share 2 of his press cycles with us, because 14 and 15 were very different. But he's like, yeah, here's the press cycles. You can just take them back with you. And, the generosity there was amazing. But probably we couldn't put into place everything that I wanted to do in 2017, because I got home and 2 days later we started picking.
I was like, there was one point he was like, I think I need to come home. And I was like, no, stay. He's like, no, I'm like, no, we've got this. Kathy and I have it. We've got it covered.
Josh Bergstrom texted Eric and is like, don't you dare let him come home.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity of lifetime. So we wrote it out. I got home, and 2 days later we started picking. But one thing that happened in 2017, and you get caught with your pants down and you learn sometimes on the fly. Well, we had a bumper crop in 2017 and ended up being short a number of barrels. And one of the things I saw while working in Burgundy is that Dominique starts his fermentation in tank first before going to barrel. So that was one thing we did, and we're able to implement that vintage, which has led into something we do now on every vintage. What happens is you have a more uniform fermentation because you've got it all fermenting at the same time instead of one barrel is dry, one barrel is sweet, and one's about halfway through fermentation. So, we've taken a lot of little things. We did discover some tanks while working for Burgundy.
Ken came home and we sold every tank we had and ordered brand new tanks because they were, well, they're gorgeous, but they're these, you can maybe see them if we turn, they're lossy tanks. So they're very tall and cylindrical, and they have a racking arm in the bottom. So Dominique works with them. And so when he was barreling down, there was this racking arm where you can just slowly move it down and do a lees selection. And it was so precise. And he came home, he was like, we need to change everything.
The other thing about our facility, which we've told you about, is it's freaking tiny. And by going more narrow and tall, you get the benefit of better settling and lees compaction. But we also probably picked up 20 square feet of floor space, which for us is like 1,000 for someone else. So those were probably the two biggest things taken away.
No. The biggest thing was yield
in Chardonnay.
Because he was like, I'm standing in Merceau, and the first 5 producers to pick, are Leroy, Lafon, Aunt, Rouleau, and Coche. And he's like, and you see their yields on the vines, and they're so much similar to what the Pinot Noir yields are.
So lowest yields, first 5 producers to pick, and oddly enough, probably 5 of the greatest producers of Chardonnay, period. And so that was something we decided to implement in 2018.
We have friends who are like, why don't you guys do some trials on like vineyards? And Ken's like, I'm going all in.
So every vineyard we work with, we aggressively shoot thinned early to set our yield so that at veraison, we would be hopefully dropping nothing on the ground. So the plant is only ripening stuff we're going to keep.
Yeah.
Therefore, the idea being that you're going to reach optimum sugar, but have a really low pH, but less malic acid, so that post-mallow, you have low pH again, but high total acidity or high TA, and this density and power, but lightness and freshness at the same time. And that's what we got in 2018. And it pretty much, it has set the stage for everything we're gonna do with our vineyards moving forward, because we did it again in 2019, and altogether completely different vintage. 18, easy, warm, dry, cool September, just a classic easy vintage, where 2019 completely opposite. Super cool throughout, lots of mildew pressure, even cooler in September. Kind of reminded me of like my first 3 vintages in 95, 96, 97, where it fucking rained all through harvest. I'm like, this isn't very much fun, but we danced around the rain and we got almost identical fruit numbers and concentration that we got in 18, but still showing off what the vintage has to say. So
clearly the mezcal is allowing us to drop some F-bombs.
Whatever.
Okay. Otherwise, this was going to be shown to children, but now I'm going to have to because kids have a lot of interest in learning about wine and trips to Burgundy and getting new tanks.
Right.
They're big on that stuff. So
now
we're going to have to censor it out.
There is some talk right now about the oak profile in the 2007 La Convert, and back to what 17
yeah.
La Convert, and he actually, to go back to what he was saying, like he came home from Burgundy, all the fruit started coming in,
yeah.
And when they had done crop estimates at lag phase in the vineyard, we had an idea of how many tons of fruit were going to come into the winery. And about a week into harvest, he'd just gotten back from Burgundy. We're starting to pick, and things are coming in. And he walks into the house. I'm setting up for lunch, and he's got a little like deer in the headlights look on his face. And he says, "Honey, I need some more barrels. We're going to be short on Chardonnay barrels." And I was like, "Cool. I mean, Chardonnay barrels, used white barrels in Oregon are like unicorns. So great. How many of these little unicorns do we need?" And he's like 50. Yeah. And I was like, "What?" And so I literally got online and like looked everywhere. And of course, if you need used Chardonnay barrels, you go to California. And we literally got a truckload full of Paul Meyer barrels, like on the road and up
Yeah,
here.
they sell them off after 2 years.
Right. So
it was very fortunate to get those.
amazing, but they're like their neutral white barrels are very different than our neutral white barrels because they have heavier toast levels, and so there's a slightly different oak profile on the Lac Convert, specifically because like all of the white barrels that we had, we like coveted for the X-Novo, the Seven Springs, the Justice, like those. And then we had to like scramble and he got some new barrels. So it's the oak profile is slightly different on the 17 Lac Convert, but it's balanced back out.
Yeah, it has gone back. So we're fortunate because of our relationship with Dominique. We get his personal barrels for Domaine Comte Lafon from Dami. So it's a special Vosges selection, 3-year air dried that he calls V6. So we get them. And Lingua Franca gets them, and that's it. So that's very nice. And then Chassin makes barrels specifically for us. But we're not, we mentioned earlier, we're never going to settle, and we're always going to try and advance what we do in learning. And I'm a big fan of what Thomas is doing at Lingua Franca. And Mercury barrels on his wines are beautiful. And I'm like, well, I'll experiment with those. And they just did not work. And sometimes there's no real rhyme or reason to it. It just doesn't work. So we're still learning, and we've settled into a program with the barrels, and it's back to where it should be with 2018 and 2019. We're still going to try some stuff. I mean,
yeah.
I'm kind of a sucker for someone who cold calls on us to sell us equipment and actually,
no,
not right now, who actually knows something about our wine. So the Francois Frere people stopped by in spring of 2019. And they're like, well, we've kind of changed the profile. Pierre of Colan Moret is using these wines. I'm like, I dig his wines. That's cool. So why don't you just send me 2, but you get 1 shot. If your barrels are terrible, you're never going to be allowed in our cellar again. And they happen to be pretty good. So, we're always going to keep pushing and experimenting and elevating what we do.
Sure. Send me a couple.
So you guys are talking a lot about like,
what? Sorry.
You guys are talking a lot about like Chardonnay and yields for Chardonnay. Are you guys doing the same thing for Pinot Noir?
Similar. I think with Pinot Noir, you can leave a slightly bigger crop. But we are thinning similarly.
I think historically the thing is that the thought was, well, I think there's a couple different things. I think Pinot Noir has been farmed impeccably for a long time up here. Like that has been that's been the baby. That's been what everyone's focused on. If you're planting a vineyard from the 80s through now, or I guess through about 7 years ago, you planted the best land to Pinot Noir and you farmed it because that was where the money was. And the white grapes, you had to hang almost twice as much crop to get the same financial return on the acre. And oftentimes it wasn't farmed to the
when
same
we
standard.
started getting Chardonnay in 2011, top end Chardonnay was going for about
25.
I would like $1,900 a ton.
And so you have this huge shift that's happened with Chardonnay specifically because now people are paying Pinot Noir prices for Chardonnay grapes. And in some cases more, there's less of it. And to find like a really inspiring vineyard, everybody wants it, right? So you're going to pay for great Chardonnay, and that gives the grower the ability to farm it well. It starts inspiring growers to plant Chardonnay with intention in better sites, better elevations, rockier soils. And so it's completely shifted the paradigm and conversation. So there's more to talk about with that shift because it's changed so dramatically over the last 7 years.
But we are definitely, a little more aggressive shoot thinning early so as to give the plant what it needs and not hang 5 tons to the acre and then come through at Veraison and cut off 2 tons, shocking the plant and just putting fruit on the ground. That the plant's been carrying this load this whole time, and then you go through and put all this fruit on the ground and cross your fingers that it's going to get ripe in time. Maybe delaying, ripeness.
You're also forcing a plant to like get all of this fruit.
It's wasting so much energy.
Halfway to ripening, whereas she can just focus. That she can just focus on it all the way from the beginning.
And the sites we're working with for Pinot Noir are
they're dialed. Yeah. They're
the crews in there. I mean, we truly do work with some of the best people in the valley, and we've all work together to dial in what we want done. And it's really happened over, 2018 was our 10th anniversary vintage.
Yeah.
And I think in the last 2 to 3 years, working alongside of our growers and dialing everything in, I think we've really brought a lot of focus to what we're trying to accomplish.
You kind of mentioned that there's been a shift more to Chardonnay. Chardonnay's getting a little more expensive for, purchasing grapes. Do you feel like Oregon, because in the beginning, like 10 years ago, it was all Pinot Noir in Oregon.
Yep.
Now you see all these like producers just making white. They're just making Chardonnay. They're barely making any Pinot. Do you think the Willamette Valley in general may be growing more into a Chardonnay region at least for its popularity?
The potential's always been there for sure. You see Chardonnay only projects. Our good friend Josh Bergstrom, he's like, if I started this over again, I would do a Chardonnay only winery. He said he would do that. Just trust me, he did. There's a lot of it being planted, and there is an emphasis on it. I think as we move forward, you're going to see a lot of great stuff out there.
We believe that the Willamette Valley is one of the great cool climate Chardonnay regions in the world.
Yeah.
And I believe that there are a group of people that are super hyper obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And that will continue to push the conversation and push the quality. And we will start seeing Willamette Valley Chardonnays, turning heads in blind tastings against some of the greats in the world. And I think we have that potential, but we're just starting. We're just scratching the surface.
I think, with still finding better and better sites to plant, pushing the envelope on what you're planting there, whether it's a selection massal type planting, diversity of clones, like what Craig has done at X-Novo. There are very few multi-clone blocks of Chardonnay in the valley. And I think that is a really great way to show off place through that diversity. And
like Craig said, strengthen the agriculture within a site, the diversity of clones, and it's inspiring.
No monocultures, but there's a lot of land that's been planted to Chardonnay. There are multiple vineyards that are planted just to Chardonnay. I mean, if you just go over Bethel Heights Road, you've got the Piasta Vineyard, Domaine Serene just bought some property there. Seven Springs South Block is there. So there's probably just in that little area alone, probably 60 acres of just Chardonnay planted. So it's definitely a thing, and there's a lot of people that are very excited about it and a lot of commitment and dedication to raising the standards.
We're getting some questions about the wolf pack, so I think we have to shift.
Yeah. So that's kind of the big question everyone has.
Charlie's involved, except we won't stop talking.
I don't know. One of the big questions that everyone has is kind of, what's the Wolfpack membership? I think there's a little confusion in the beginning. Eric has clarified it really well on Wine Berserkers, but maybe, this will be an opportunity for people to understand that it's not like a members only, that's the only way you can get wine method.
No.
So Ken and I, Andy, Jess, we host, 2 appointments a day. So we used to 2 to 12 people. Every day we got asked, do you have a membership? Do you have a club? Do you have a membership? Do you have a club? And we, for years, resisted it. We felt like we wanted to have a more personal connection with people. We wanted to be able to tailor what they bought for what they want. And that still holds true 100%. Like, we want to make sure that if you like Chardonnay, you buy Chardonnay. And if you like Pinot Noir and you're in love with Temperance Hill, then you get Temperance Hill. But we also, if there is a place where there's a demand for something, and we talked to a couple of our friends that also for many years resisted it. I mean, Patricia Green didn't have a club until Margaret came on recently, a couple years ago, and it has been very successful for them. Hayu also will talk to you about how it completely changed their business. And so we felt like, in a time when we can't host people the same way, in the same way that we needed to get creative, and we also had this demand for it. So we decided to come up with something. We understood from the beginning that it wasn't going to be for everybody. We understood that there are people that want to buy the wines that they want to buy, and we're going to accommodate that. I mean,
we're in the business of making a beverage of pleasure and selling people wine and sharing it.
And we didn't want to have it be this like, oh, you have to do this to do this. But at the same time, we had a huge response for it. It was really successful. The launch was really successful. And we're absolutely humbled by it. And during the launch, like, we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know how many people were going to sign up. So we essentially locked up some of the inventory that was really limited, so we could figure out who was going to sign up, how many people we needed to accommodate, because we had to use the wines that we have, the 2018s, essentially to build that program out for the next 9 months until the 19s came out. And so once we had an idea of how many people were signed up, where we were with inventory, we started essentially changing. And we stumbled. Change is hard. We also had a pretty crazy week, and we won't go into it, but last week was a real tough week for us. And I had set the email to go and forgot to unset it, and had been kind of working through some of the feedback we had from our best customers about their experiences with other memberships and things, and were in the process of like adding a quarterly option and doing a couple of things. And the email went out because I forgot to unschedule it. And so
this is typical us. We are full disclosure.
Walter Scott Circus. So yeah, so it went out. We're like, oh shit. And Andy literally sends a text and goes, well, this is going to be interesting. And we were all laughing and like, oh my God, we're going to get pummeled a little bit right now, but we're also, anyway, so we went out. We were very excited about the response, but we are very acutely aware of the people that have supported us from the beginning and continue to support us, and people who have found us through Charlie's amazing support and other people who have shared our wines. And that's not something that we're ever going to turn our back on. Ever. It just, Ken and I negotiate how many single vineyard Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs that we're going to make each year. And as more and more were happening, releasing 12 wines at the same time is too much. So we had already had a plan of like shifting the release schedule into a quarterly release schedule, which is a huge part of what the basis also for part of the Wolfpack thing was like, okay, now we need to shift. And it's hard because we're in the middle of a system that we've been in for so many years and trying to shift the business structure and shift the cash flow coming in. But it's all going to be okay. And anybody who wants wine, you just email me and we'll make sure you get wine. That's the deal. But also most of the wines are back up at this point. There's only 4 of them that are hyper limited. And if you need them, you just email me. That's great.
Kind of talking about hyper limited, there was a mention in the Wolfpack about like limited or small quantity bottlings. Do you have some in the pipeline that you can kind of share with us?
Well, there's that thing called rock salt that we've been tasting through. Well, we've been tasting with Brian and coming up with the Viticole cuvées, which has been awesome. But while we've been doing that, we've also been really inspired by the rock salt that we made with him, which, all full disclosure, the rock salt is the 9 extra cases of the Viticole cuvée that we made. Yeah. And we were so excited about that wine. Yeah. And
super fun.
So
Erica and I, we taste through every barrel together and make our decisions. We are super severe in what makes the cut for single vineyards.
We negotiate on reductive barrels.
Yeah, my threshold for reduction, Erica's threshold for reduction. So we go through, we make sure, for us, the single vineyards have to scream of where they come from. And we also want the Willamette Valley to be really special because that's our calling card. As Becky Wasserman used to say about Burgundians, you can tell a great producer in Burgundy by their Bourgogne Rouge and Bourgogne Blanc. So the Willamette Valley has to be crazy good and the lead into everything else we do. So we taste through everything, and along the way, every couple of years, we'll find something like 2015, we came across 4-barrel co-ferment of Seven Springs, Dumb Ox, and St. Augustine. Yeah. Old, own-rooted, Pomard vines that were being ripped out of the ground, and we called it Los Muertos. There was 100 cases.
My father lives in Mexico. When we were married in Mexico, so there's a little bit of, he's actually a Mexican citizen, and there's a little bit of that in and we had a Bacocho, which is the beach we were married on, and then we made a Los
Bacocho was
Muertos.
black label, oldest vines we work with skulls in the background.
Calaveras.
In Calaveras. So there is a Bacocho in the pipeline. I've been wanting to do a Cuvée Lucille for our daughter since she was born. And in 2019, there will be a Cuvée Lucille Chardonnay from Freedom Hill, from a block that we've worked with Dustin to hone in. Some of the oldest Chardonnay vines that we work with and our original block there.
And some of the youngest. Somebody earlier asked about the vine age at Freedom Hill. That there is
1995 planting, a 2009 planting, and a 2015 planting. And the youngest planting in 2015 was planted just for us. The middle one, 2009, that was the first block we got in 2012 when Freedom Hill had some fruit come available, which we jumped at the opportunity to work with them. I called up Dan Duché. Actually, Jim Anderson had reached out. He's like, hey, Freedom Hill's got some fruit available. I called up Dan Duché and he's like, I got a block of Pinot Noir left. I'm like, I'll take it. He's like, you don't even know where it is. I'm like, I don't care. And I show up and we're driving through the vineyard and there's this block of Chardonnay. And he's like, you can have that, just name your price. I'm like, I'll take that too. It's kind of like a woman at a shoe sale or something. And, you know, a year later, Dan Duché is here for our release party. And he's like, hey, did you get my email? I'm like, no, Dan, I haven't seen it. He's like, you know, the landscape for Chardonnay has changed and we're going to raise the price on that. Are you okay with that? I'm like, yeah, Dan, just tell me what you need us to pay and we'll take it.
What is Ken's aromatic equivalent? What is the aromatic equivalent of Ken's threshold for reduction? Awesome question.
That's a really good one. Oh man.
A lot.
It's
Tire
definitely,
fire.
I wouldn't go tire fire, but I think, you know, reduction when it's right, it should never be the picture. It should be a frame that accentuates all the positives
And
of that picture.
all the pretty things should be able
All
to
the pretty
be
things.
seen in it.
And what reduction does is it shows that there is intention, one, that the wines are going to age well. I think reduction accentuates texture. I think it accentuates aromatics. And it brings minerality and accentuates that as well. So when it's done right, I think it's awesome. And we pursue it, but we don't want it to be, if you smell a wine and you're like, man, this is super reduced, I think it's awesome. It's like, you've kind of lost the point of showing off place. Right. Like, man, this wine's great because it's all whole cluster. It's like, but can you tell where it's from? I think that's really important. And I think Willamette Valley Chardonnay, specifically from the Yola-Amity Hills, has the potential to age. And we want to build those wines with balance, but also with some ability to go in the cellar for a bit.
They said that they don't actually want to see us. They want to see Lucy and the cat.
I can't blame them.
Lucy and the cat are way cuter than we are.
Yeah.
Ken, I have a question. I'll probably do like 2 more questions and we'll open up questions to the public.
Sure.
Since a lot of people have a lot of questions. But you kind of talked about, you know, a sense of Willamette Valley. There also, you know, I drank a bunch of your wine. So there's like I feel like there's a site specificity in your wines. Do you kind of do élevage differently for each Pinot and each Chardonnay? Is there like a different process for each vineyard, barrel time, picking, everything?
Sure. So we do make adjustments. Our goal, we don't make wine by recipe. Everything I know about winemaking, I've learned from other people. I didn't go to school for it. We want to show off place and vintage every year. And I think you can make subtle changes every year, whether it's a little more whole cluster in a fermentation or none at all. Pump overs, shortening, doing pigeage with a pump over on a fermentation. We look at every fermenter every day and see what it needs individually.
And every barrel.
And then with Chardonnay, you know, oftentimes people pick their Chardonnay, they put it in barrel, they put it in the corner and like, well, it's just fermenting, it's just doing its thing. We check historically, we check temperature and progress of fermentation on every barrel every day during harvest. Yeah. You know, Henri Boileau used to say, and there's some Burgundians that are really good at Pinot Noir and some that are good at Chardonnay and some that excel at both. Henri Boileau traditionally has been one of those that does well at both. And Remington Norman asked him, he's like, how do you do both? He's like, I make time for it. So we make time for both. And with, you know, Pinot Noir, we might do, as I mentioned, more whole cluster, less whole cluster, pump over versus pigeage, barrel regime, etc. With Chardonnay, we might cut the press off sooner. We might take more lees to barrel. We might take less bees to barrel.
Everything. I mean, that
We
was
taste
somebody,
everything.
somebody came through here and we were talking, and you know, we taste the press the whole time the press is running.
Yeah.
Every few minutes we're tasting and tasting.
And we're checking the pH on
We're
it. As
tasting
soon as
the
it,
lees as we're pulling the lees and making sure, like, the minute it turns bitter, the minute we don't like what we're getting, we cut it.
we cut it off. And we
that's-
might sacrifice, you know,
Yeah.
100 liters or whatever, but it's about getting the best.
Yeah.
We are still tweaking things. As I mentioned earlier, there's always opportunity to learn. And some of our favorite producers in Burgundy crush their Chardonnay before pressing it. 2019, we were in a fortunate position to be able to get a new escalator with a crusher unit on it. And so we took blocks where we had enough volume to do half whole cluster pressed and half crushed.
Fascinating.
Just to see, and we incorporated, so we have our own press cycle, we have Dominique's press cycle, and then we have 2 from Rouleau that we used. And so we're still learning. I mean, we're 11 years in. And we're gonna keep pushing. We're gonna play with barrels. I think vineyards, we're good. We know what we're gonna do there. In the cellar, it's just gonna be little things every year, and we're gonna push it to put the best product in those bottles.
Sorry, cool. I think we'll open it up for general questions to the public now.
Awesome.
I asked
Have
enough
you
questions.
Have you been keeping the questions we need to answer?
No, they are going to raise their hands,
Okay.
and they will be put
Hopefully.
on video by Todd and I. So Ben has a question first, so Ben will be first up. Todd, if you can do it, sorry.
He's unmuted. Yep. Well, he was on mute again. There you go. Go ahead, Ben.
I had a farming question.
Oh! I got some power washing needs doing.
Okay. I steamed those barrels from Pallmeyer. I had to wash all those out.
Yes,
Yes,
you
you
did.
did.
Yes, you did. We steamed the piss out of those barrels.
So I have a question about farming. So it seems like lately, especially in the Willamette Valley, there's been a lot of talk about no-till farming. And it seems like in wine, everyone wants to talk in absolutes, you know, like you must grow biodynamically or you must grow organically or no-till is the way we do things. But also wine growing and wine making is very dynamic. So I was wondering what your experiences have been with that and when you think it's a positive benefit and when you think it's not the right fit for things.
So no-till, we have a perfect example. Temperance Hill, Dyke Crisp, who's been farming Temperance Hill since 2000 organically, beautiful, lovely man. He looks at his vineyard and decides it's not, again, by recipe, and he observes. So our block at Temperance Hill, very vigorous, higher elevation, and just happens to be in very deep Jory soil. So it has a lot of vigor. It has access to a lot of nitrogen. So plowing it introduced more nitrogen into the soil. And we kept seeing our crop get blown through inflorescence necrosis, which means too much nitrogen during flowering. So we would, instead of getting 2.5 tons, we get 1.3. The last 2 years, every row has not been plowed. So that is seeing where no-till works. I think when vines are young, you need to incorporate and work that soil a little bit in order to build it up. But you have to observe what's happening in your vineyard. You can't just be like, I'm going to farm biodynamically because it's what I need to do. It's like, but does your vineyard need it? Our soils here have not been ravaged by chemicals and pesticides, some. And so, you know, you have to just
Biodynamics is really good at repairing
soils for sure.
hurt. I mean, it's a great, I think being mindful of the soil anytime is great, but it's site by site.
Site by site and evolution. How old are the vines? I mean, if you have a 30-year-old vine vineyard like Irie, you're not going to plow that stuff. What you're going to do is introduce more phylloxera, and it's just going to ravage that place. So you don't till it at all. You just let that soil be its own thing because those roots are 30 feet into those joy soils, which there isn't a lot of rock there. So you just have to observe and feel it and, you know, go site by site to see what works best.
I mean, I think that anytime you can take out the implementation of motors and you cannot disrupt the soil and all of the life that lives in the soil, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But you do have vineyards that have maybe been farmed one way or another that may need nutrients tilled back and organic matter put back in the soils. And I think, you can build that in many different ways. Not everybody is in a position to introduce livestock and do livestock integration. That's amazing. I hope more of us
We'd
can.
do that in a heartbeat if we had land.
Yeah, but I think, again, it's not a recipe. You have to look at site by site by site. And there are sites that will really struggle with no-till, and there are sites that really will just go nuts.
Yeah, for sure.
But we believe in it, and we are huge proponents of, of farming the best way for the environment and the site
Absolutely.
as possible. So
yeah. No residual chemicals in our wines, and do everything we can. I think a lot of domestic producers don't really look, you look at, like, say, Jean-Louis Chave is reclaiming parts of Saint-Joseph and Hermitage to build for the next generation 50 years down the road. He's not necessarily thinking about himself, but he as a steward for the next generation. And I think that's hard for us to grasp sometimes, because we feel like it's such a short term for us to make some money and make some wine and do our thing. But I think we need to think in longer terms with how we farm and how we treat the planet through what we do viticulturally.
We don't really own anything. We're just stewarding it for a small period of time, and it's our responsibility to turn it over better than we found it, I think.
Yeah.
So that leads perfectly. That leads perfectly into the next one, which is going to be people have been asking to find out more about X-Novo, and Craig Williams agreed to be unmuted. So you just got to accept the request to unmute, Craig, and you're on.
There we go. How's that?
Oh, wow.
I won't scream so loud this time. Sorry.
Look at
You guys are great. This is tremendous. I'm really enjoying all of this. This is really wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much for orchestrating this. And Erica and Ken, super to see you. Great. And I love, I don't know if you point to it, but I love the quote from Remington Norman behind you. It really focuses in on what you're all about. And it comes through today loudly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, nice to see your face too. You got a beard's looking.
This is my COVID-19 look. Yes. Yeah.
It's
great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. No barber, no shaving. This is it. I'm not sure if there's a specific question, but I would just say that my wife Robin and I are just so honored that Erica and Ken have stepped up and I think saw the vision of what we were trying to establish in Oregon that started back in 2010. And they said, we'll take the whole thing. And that really is great, because the way that we laid the Chardonnay block out in particular was more in a Paulinian fashion. So we knew where every clone or selection is located for future reference. But they took it all, which is how we wanted to grow and sell the fruit. And it's just a selection of a number of different heirloom on-top selections that some might say are great, some might say they're not so great, but together they bring a very distinctive, unique look to the site. And we're all about what Erica and Ken are about, which is to focus on the region or the regionality, the wonderful qualitative attributes of the site. And we agree 110% that not only Oregon, Willamette Valley, but in the Eola-Amity region, you just have some really interesting growing conditions that I think make for some really superior tasting fruit. So we're just really happy that they're the stewards of our grapes.
Well, we're incredibly honored to work with that vineyard, and we intend to for the rest of the time we're in business. And, for us, working with you, Craig, is an opportunity to learn. Every time we chat on the phone, it's something little, and we haven't been able to walk the vineyard as much as we would like, but it's a really, really special place with incredible energy, and we're just trying to show it off.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much. And I think, I'll just say it's just been really special working with you, and for everyone that's still listening and on. The one thing that we did take a baby step this year, and this is Erica and Ken's they're holding our hand here, but we're going organic. So we're starting organic farming at X-Novo this year. And we're excited about that. And to the prior question, I think we too are trying to figure out what is the best way to farm in Oregon. We can read about Burgundian, we can read about California and elsewhere, but you really have to take the local conditions and work with them and just not use a broad brush and say, I'm just going to do it this way, because there are other things that are in Oregon, like voles, these little mice that are in the ground cover, and create some problems. And so sometimes if you don't cultivate, even though I'd like to do no-till, all I'm doing is creating vole condos. And so that's a problem. They girdle the vines and you have to come back and replant vines. So I'll stop there. And
I mean, we're going to continue to learn as we have, climate change is going to throw us different curveballs. The voles have been issues on and off. These drier vintages, we see more of that. And we have to adjust. We have to observe and feel it and talk to each other and work together to find ideas on how we can just be better and deal with what we have to do in order to grow this fruit.
Agreed.
And
thanks Todd and Charlie for setting this up. Yeah. It's been great.
Thanks, Greg. Good to see you. How's Robin?
Great. She's great. We're just hanging in here. We're just holding on tight.
So on the vole situation, I can speak from experience on that one. If you get some barn owls going on, get some barn owl houses. They eat like multiple voles a day. I know that because they used to leave vole pellets all over my little backyard here. So I know a little too much about how voles can make a difference there. So, or how much barn owls can make a difference. All right, next is Diana. You are going to be unmuted. Diana Day. As soon as you accept it, we're good to go.
Yep, good.
There you go.
Yes,
You're on.
we're good. All right. Hi, Ken and Erica.
Hi.
Hi. So I was wondering, your 2018 drinkability, what do you suggest for that? One of your neighbors suggested 2020 to 2025 for drinking it with starting with a sequitur. So I don't know whether you agree with that or whether you're going to do a couple years down the road, or.
So I feel like. Yeah, go. Ken and I have always really felt like cellaring wine is very subjective. Everyone likes wine in a different window of maturity. For us, we very much like vibrancy and freshness in the wines that we're drinking. So, and we don't have a big cellar. So that's probably part of it. It's more just environment of it. But we like that. So we've always felt like Oregon wine is just hitting its stride 4 to 6 years from vintage. So for 18s, that would be what, 2022 to 2024.
Yeah.
But I think, again, it all comes down to what you're looking for in your wine. You might like a little bit more maturity and a little bit more development and more, just those secondary notes in wines. And then in that case, we certainly, our goal is to build wines, make wines that have the ability to age. And I think that they can age 10, 15 years easily. I mean, we just, for the 10-year anniversary, we went back and opened wines all the way back to 2009. Certainly there are years that we learned like, we would have made different decisions on those vintages. With the hindsight's always 2020, but we were very, very happy with how the wines and, the Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs were showing from 2011, 2012, 2013. But again, I think it's so subjective as to what we're all looking for. But for us, again, 4 to 6 years from vintage, they really just start hitting their stride.
Yeah.
That's what, we have your sequitur and a couple others from 2017 that I have in a box that says 2025 ? And so I do it, I want to do them all together, do a side-by-side comparison of them. And I'm
Right. I mean, I think, anytime 2021 to 2025, they're going to be great. Fingers crossed.
Storage conditions, and we in 2014, we had been on a few marketing trips that spring, and we were up in Seattle, and all of our wines were under natural cork at that point. And we took all of our own samples up there, and we saw out of the same box a lot of inconsistency, and started considering working with Diam. It was in the summer of 2014, after the Pinot Noir celebration. We used to host all the sommeliers here. We'd have a bonfire, maybe drink too much, etc. And Dominique Lafon stopped by because he loves a good party. And we were chatting, and he's like, I've had it. I'm going all Diam on everything all the way through Montrachet because I'm tired of opening up corked bottles of our best wines. And at that point, I'm like, if it's good enough for him to put on his Montrachet, then we're going to do it. And like we tend to do, we don't experiment. We just hard charge it and switch entirely to Diam. And for us, it's Craig's efforts, Dustin's efforts, all the efforts that go into the wine, our efforts here in the cellar, that, you know, to take those wines from the vineyard to the barrel to the bottle, and then to put something that's going to create inconsistency to you people. We couldn't have that anymore. And now the wines, we know every time someone pulls a cork, it's exactly how we intended the wine to be when we put it in bottle. They might be a little tighter.
Yeah, the élevage is a little bit tighter.
It might take a little bit longer. And even with Diam, you know, us pushing our quality level, you know, we wanted to switch over to the Origine, which is the beeswax polymer. So we've done that. For the Willamette Valley wines, which are meant to be consumed in a shorter window, we wanted the DM5, but we still wanted the normal length cork. So we had to order those from France on a 6-month lead time, but we were willing to do that, and we might have a little extra, but we're going to do it anyway. So that'll be another change that will be happening this year, is that we're switching all entirely to the Origine corks, which are beeswax polymer for all the wines.
Yeah. But
well, we can't wait to see you guys again.
What?
So we can't wait to come and visit you guys again.
We can't wait to have you back.
We can't wait to have people in our cellar again too.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, so we got 4 more questions so far. Sean, I know you're relaxed back on the couch there. You're going to have to move all the way back to the computer to accept the request to unmute. And then go back to your leisurely sitting on the back of the couch position. There you go.
Kitty was working, so she came up and joined us. Hi, Erica and Ken. Thank you so much for doing this. It's great to hear from you guys.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks for telling us.
To be here.
Oh, I love your Chardonnay so much. It's my favorite. Oh my God. Don't change.
Don't change anything. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Okay.
You just answered my question basically about the corks, so that's very interesting. Craig, can I ask Craig a question?
Sure. Let me unmute him. Okay, Craig.
So Craig, I mean, where did you come up with the idea to select all these different old clones to plant in your vineyard?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. This is just something that I've been working on and thinking about and working on here in California. So my first foray in winemaking has been in the Napa Valley and Sonoma Coast regions for a long time. And all of these selections are basically something that we curate, or I curated over a number of years, and I was able to kind of keep a little nursery going down in the Carneros region. And it was just something that I felt very passionate about, and was able to, over time, bring them up to the X-Novo site. And it was just sort of, I'm going to jump in all the way and just do this. And we initially, as I mentioned earlier, we set it up so we go back and look at the selections. But now, as we are developing more Chardonnay in another vineyard, we're just taking it all together and just mixing it all up. So I know what I have, and I tweak it here and there. But basically, it just seemed right. And there's just so many selections, as Ken and Erica know, in Burgundy. I mean, we really haven't, I think, in this country done as well as Europe, and especially France, in curating and selecting clones or selections over the years. And what makes a lot of these vineyards distinct is this multi-clonal approach, not only from a unique flavor profile, but also the terroir, the site, and also the health of the vineyard. Erica touched on it, but I think from a biodiversity and a health standpoint, it makes much more sense to be diverse. And so I would say the one thing that we don't have in the selection, or I've tried to avoid, are what are called the muscat selections of Chardonnay that have more of these terpenes in them, that have more linalool, so they smell a little bit more like a Gewürztraminer or Riesling. And I tended to shy away from those, and I really don't have any of those in our planting.
Makes for a fascinating wine.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for everyone listening. It's been great. These, again, Ken and Erica are just incredible folks, and they are, from my standpoint, making reference point wine from Oregon. So.
Oh, thanks.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, that was a good question, Sean. Thank you. Now we have 4 more questions. So here we go. Robert Michaels, you are unmuted.
Hey, Ken. Hey, Erica. Thank you guys so much for.
Hi, Robert.
This has been a really fun and informative session. And to all the participants that are still on the call, if you guys make it to the Willamette Valley, you absolutely have to get to Walter Scott. Erica leads an awesome tasting. And I'm not going to hijack somebody else's question, but I hope they get a chance to ask their question about your tasting. The question that I had revolves around climate change. You know, when I think of a cool climate style, both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, I get very concerned about things like climate change, even up there in the Willamette Valley. What have you guys noticed over the last 5, or I guess the 10 years? What are you guys seeing with pick dates and other markers of climate change, and anything you guys are thinking about doing, or how can you prepare for stuff like that?
Yeah, the biggest thing is we're increasingly earlier. That's just been seen. I mean, we're 10, 14 days earlier. So generally starting to look at picking into the first week, second week of September. It's the biggest thing is the extremes, heat spikes that shut vines down. Dramatic weather events like 2013 when we got 7 inches of rain in 5 days. It's really the extremes. I think we're still very cool in the grand scheme of things. And we see, even in vintages like 14 and 16, which were one of the hottest vintages and one of the earliest vintages, we still see, and even in 15, which was the hottest vintage on record, we still see really good acid retention, because we may be hot during the day, but specifically in the Ola Amity Hills, we get cooling breezes at night, which give us a good diurnal shift. So we're going to have to keep observing and watching and make changes. As it's warmer, your window just collapses more quickly. Jean-Marc Rouleau talks about, you used to have picking Chardonnay, if you're in late September, you might have a 7 to 10 day window to pick. But if you're picking in the first week of September, your window is maybe— Or in August, like we did. We started picking grapes in August in 2016. Your window collapses to just a few days. So you have to be on it. You have to be sampling and ready to go. And I think we've generally been ready to go.
But just to also touch on that, like, it's not just a steady warming. I mean, to touch on what Ken said, it's extreme. So yeah. The last 10 years in the Willamette Valley, we've had 2 of the coldest, latest vintages on record. In 2010, 11. We've had 3 of the hottest, warmest, earliest vintages on record with 14, 15, and 16. And 13 would have been right in there if we hadn't had a typhoon at harvest.
13 was hot until we got that rain in September. And after the rain, it went right back up to 80 degrees.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it has less, it's not just about a steady warming. It's about that the growers are really, thank goodness the farming up here is just absolutely on top of its game, because they need to be reacting to and looking at what is happening each year. And again, like, not farming with a recipe, but reacting to the vintages that we're being handed, because they're very different and they're kind of swinging back and forth. And I think when you look at X-Novo and you look at Sojourner and Freedom Hill, and you see this consistency year to year, even when you see this vintage swing that is so dramatic, it really speaks to the farming and the growers and the sites and their impeccable attention to detail.
Yeah, little things like leaving more leaves in the fruit zone to give shading. Yeah. Because we're getting these, at 4 o'clock, you've got the sun, and all of our rows, generally speaking, are north-south. So that fruit is exposed and we're seeing a lot of sunburn. Some of the newer plantings, they're giving a slight southwest nod instead of due north-south, so as to kind of protect from those late afternoon heat spikes, which have seen a lot of sunburn in recent years. So everyone's working and talking and sharing and figuring out how to deal with it.
The one other thing I want to point on is we had the incredible pleasure and ability to go back to France last June with Sue and Andy. And
This is a big thing.
Every single cellar that we were in, the question that we asked was, what are you doing for climate change? And over and over and over, we heard selection Massal is more important than ever, because you need diversity in the vineyard. You need clonal diversity so that you have that complexity and you have a stronger vineyard that can really, react to these different climate situations. And, and whether it was going on in the Northern Rhone, or it was, speaking to, the Munier-Giborg sisters, or Lafon and Burgundy,
Dimonti,
they were all like, it's all about diversity in the vineyards. And they talked about how they had gone more clonal block, much like the New World, which I didn't really realize, and that a lot of them are going back to selection Massal because they feel like those selection Massal blocks are so much stronger. So
Jean Gonan, arguably, I would say our single best domain visit ever. I mean, what they farm and what they do and their commitment and dedication. He's like, we're going back. Anything we're new plantings or replanting is all older, lower yielding, later ripening clones and selection Massal.
The heirloom clones that they all went away from. They all went like in this direction of more Dijon clone earlier, who's really in, anyway, they're all going back to more heirloom clones. So that was an interesting takeaway from that trip.
Yeah, it was an incredible trip and learned a lot. But our mission on that trip, one, it was, a little reward to the team, but also it was a learning expedition. And the biggest thing was, what are you dealing with climate change? And then little things in the cellar that we could bring back and try and apply to what we're doing.
All right, we've got 4 more questions. It keeps being 4. It's not going away. All right, here we go. Scott Tallman, you're next. I'm going to ask to unmute you. You accept that and you're live. There you go.
Hey, guys.
Hey,
where's your dog? There it is.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned Irie earlier, and I meant to ask you this when I saw you in February. Weren't you going to make Irie Chard at some point? Were you getting fruit?
We got some for one vintage, and we decided it was a nice experiment, and we were really honored, but we wanted to really hone in on the sites that we knew we were going to work with for a really long time. Jason wanted to reach out to some producers he respected, and it was a 2-year deal. He makes the pick decision, and it was an opportunity to learn, but we really needed to bring our focus in on the vineyards we're going to work with for the rest of the time we're in business. So it was a great experience. Jason's doing great things to take that family business to the next generation and beyond. But
we're control freaks.
We are control freaks, and picking decisions is very important. And Yola-Amity Hills is where we have our roots sunk, and this is where we're going to stay.
Yeah.
Also, what beer are you drinking?
Oh!
I'm drinking your boy's beer.
The little
Freem Pilsner.
Peter Allen.
Pilsner. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
Rick Allen. Yeah.
Inspired.
I dropped off 2 cases of Willamette Valley Chardonnay to Rick a month ago, and he's like, "Do you need some beer?" And I said, "Absolutely." There's a kegerator in the winery. It was the first piece of equipment to be put in the facility.
It was literally the
back
first
in 2012.
number 1 piece of equipment that went in.
Yes.
Because who needs sorting equipment? You just need beer.
Yeah, it helps.
Yeah. The classic question is how much beer does it take to grow wine or to make wine? Yeah.
A lot.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Scott. And then next is Colleen. Colleen, I'm going to. Oh, you're already unmuted. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Erica. Hi, Ken. How are you guys doing?
Hi, guys.
We're not in Oregon, but we're close. But hey, I just want to thank you for the big Chardonnay barrel room. That's awesome. We're looking forward to seeing it. But I also just wanted to mention, I don't think you guys maybe have taken enough credit for getting the February, Oregon Chardonnay celebration started, which has been going for I know, I'm just saying, it's an awesome event. Yeah, so, but it's a beautiful event. It's great. So anyway, I just wanted to give a little shout out about that, but that wasn't the whole really. So, but my real question was, hey, you mentioned earlier about the 2019 experiments that you're doing with the half crush, half Domaine Lafon, half Roulon. So is this something where you're doing like half of the grapes from a particular block are being separated like that? Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? I'm really fascinated.
So yes. So with doing this, we didn't want to go all in. We wanted
one time.
One of the few times, not all in. So with Seven Springs, we had enough tonnage to where we could fill up the press whole cluster and do it one completely crushed. So we sent both to separate tanks.
Which vineyards did we did that? We did it on 3. Freedom Hill,
Seven Springs.
And X-Novo or no?
No, X-Novo was all crushed.
So you did go all in on X-Novo.
We went all in on X-Novo because the yield was very low, but incredible concentration. So where we could, we experimented. And the things that we saw, now that Erica and I have tasted through, there's a huge textural component, almost tannin, grippiness to the wines, phenolics. After pressing.
Let's clarify. There was a phenolic component in the crushed section of that wine.
Yes.
So you had like this very pure, very more delicate, and very polished wine that came out of the whole cluster press. But then the crushed pressings, they had this textural component that was just, we thought we'd come out and be like, oh wow, we are all in this camp, we're all in the other. And I think what we came out of it was we loved both of them and actually felt like they would be very complementary to each other.
And there's a couple sites that may do better with it versus some other sites. We also did it, so 2019 was a challenging vintage. There was probably some of the highest mildew pressure that this valley's ever seen. We did have, Justice had a little bit more mildew pressure. And I told Ben that I was going to crush it because one of the things that happens when you crush is you liberate that juice much earlier. So you're getting it off of those compromised skins. And once it goes to tank, you're getting it, 90% of the juice is liberated in like the first, 30, 40 minutes of the press cycle, which is about 3.5 hours. And you saw really beautiful fluffy leaves in the tank. So we could take all the good stuff and any of the, mildewy, cruddy stuff that was settling at the bottom, we could take the leaves off of that. So that was one of the benefits. So we're gonna tweak it. We're gonna see some sites that will benefit from it, some sites that won't.
Some sites we might do a little bit of both.
Some sites we might do some of both.
And maybe it sounds like a technique depending on the rain, late rains, etc.
Vintage dependent, if you have thicker skins, it might be a way of getting the juice liberated sooner and keeping your pH down. So there's all kinds of ways it can be used, but it's a nice piece of equipment, and we're gonna keep playing and experimenting with the sites we work with.
Well, another technique. It's awesome.
Thank you. So good to see your face.
Nice to see you
guys.
Okay, so one of the questions or the comment was that when someone asks you a question, you either welcome them as if you know them very well, or you're really good at faking it. Either way, it paints this amazing picture that you have these personal relationships with everybody who's asking a question, which is just, it's really extraordinary, actually.
You have to think that literally Ken or I have hosted 98% of the people that have come through this winery's door, and we also interact with them on email and phone and text, and so even these names are names that we've been working with and these faces and have supported us since the beginning, which is why it's so, we're so thankful and grateful for all of, and to see all these faces on this call, it's makes it a little bit less nerve-wracking to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Okay, so we got one last question. Matt Schneider, you're up. You're up next. I'm going to ask unmute you. Go ahead whenever you see it. There you go.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I got you.
You're up.
Thanks for having me. I am a new fan. I will have to thank Mr. Charlie Fu for leading me on to this. Your wines are really cool, really fun wines. But one thing I really find, I had 2 questions, but you led me away from one when you guys said like Eole Amity is it for us, so to speak. So I'm going to stay away from my Van Duzer corridor question. But my real question is, when it comes to that, is you guys do all the wines that you guys make seem to be really textural, from the Chardonnay and the Pinot. The one Pinot I've tasted a couple of the Comvert as well as X-Novo, and they're really textural wines. I'm hearing there's a lot of really cool textural Syrah coming out of Eole Amity. Do you guys see yourselves possibly venturing into that world, or are you guys straight up Berg? I see him shaking his head. Berg.
Chardonnay, Pinot Noir are first. We believe they're the 2 of the greatest translators of place. Trust me, we love Syrah. We'll drink Allemande. I'll drink Gonan. If I could drink one red wine, I would drink Gonan, Saint Joseph forever. That would be a desert island red wine for sure.
All right.
You know Meunier Givor?
Well, yeah, because you can afford it.
If I had to drink one Syrah.
Okay,
and then Aligoté and Gamay. We're definitely, Burgundy is our inspiration, and we feel that Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley truly translate place better than any other varietal, and we're going to stick to it.
I also think that, while there are world-class versions of that wine, I think that Marcus's Syrah that he makes down here is amazing.
Yeah.
There are people that are making great, interesting Syrah in the Willamette Valley. My goal with my husband is to keep him so hyper laser focused on the Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs that we're making. And when we negotiated a little bit about Gamay and Aligoté, and he needs to be inspired and he needs to continue to play and push himself. But our goal is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and that's where our attention needs to be. And if we start, and also very selfishly, if you add Syrah into that harvest schedule, it elongates tremendously, and I will kill everybody.
I'm asking the hard questions because ultimately, for your brand to be your brand, I just want to know what your plans are, so I know what to expect and what to love, and be like, hey, these guys are fucking. This is what they're doing. They're not going to mess with everything else. It's one of those questions you ask for when you're like, hey, I want to buy your next vintage.
So there's potentially 7 or 8 different bottlings of Chardonnay for 2018. So there's a lot.
Whoa is right.
Great shirt.
Yeah, I like that shirt.
Oh yeah, my Mr. Delicious.
Mr. Delicious. I need one of those.
Oh, I'm so glad that's the last question. That the Mr. Delicious shirt. That's wow.
Perfect send off.
Can't beat that. If you guys have a question, you need to just email it because you can't top Mr. Delicious.
No, you can't. That's the epitome.
That's great.
All right, Charlie.
I think that's pretty much it. Thank you, Erica, Ken, Todd
Charlie,
as well.
Thank you guys so much for inviting us to do this.
We're honored.
This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, just have to do a non-sulfur Aligoté bottling for me, just for my hipster cred.
That's the Fouvet we're talking about. Not Cuvée, but Fouvet is going to be an Aligoté. Fouvet.
But yeah, thank you guys for your time. Thank you for Craig and Andy for giving their input as well. And everyone else for all your great questions. I wish we had more time to talk more, but you guys can always email Erica and Ken. They have Instagram too.
Or Instagram.
Yeah. And hopefully
Wine
join
Berserkers.
us. Yeah, join us some more on Wine Berserkers, Erica, and because there's a lot of commentary. Brian Buzzini posts a new Walter Scott tasting note every 5 hours, I think. So,
Buzz.
So there's always a lot of commentary. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Everyone have a safe weekend.
Yeah,
Yes. Have a great weekend,
Stay
guys.
healthy, safe, and we can't wait to see you back at the winery when all
Here,
this is
here in the cellar,
Cheers.
when possible.
Cheers, you guys.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Great session, folks.